Why does ISIS want to attack Russia? I'm genuinely curious and not trying to start a flame war. Is it because of what's happening in Gaza? Ukraine? Some other event I'm not aware of? I assume that ISIS was the enemy of America. But maybe it has nothing to do with the US at all. I've searched the news and can't find any reporting on motive. Thanks. Russia fights against ISIS in Syria. ISIS is the enemy of America. And Syria. And Iran. And Russia. And Iraq. And the Taliban. And the UK. And Russia and ISIS have been in armed conflict for years, mostly in Syria. They just decided to increase attacks in Russia. There's a chance ISIS command believe Russian forces are weakened and there's enough instability they might find it easier to carry out attacks and do hard damage. The Islamic State itself is a jihadist militant group and opposes anyone who isn't them. ISIS is the common enemy of every human. It is not like Al-Qaeda, which is built on alliances and is okay with some countries. ISIS is hateful to every country, nation except itself. It attacks Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah groups, countries like Pakistan, Iran, Yemen, European countries, America, Asian countries. It was born out of vacuum created after Saddam fell. So 9/11 and American reaction to it is an indirect contributor to this inception. ISIS is just Islam Barals. All the rest of the world are its enemies, including moderate Muslims. It is one of the most radical forms of fundamentalism. I wonder if we ever met such a thing in world history. To ISIS, Talibans are moderate pussies. Russia fights ISIS in Syria to preserve their interests in the region. ISIS has literally zero allies, only enemies. They are so extreme that they consider Hamas and Al-Qaeda to be apostate groups and even went to war with the Taliban. ISIS wants to establish a Salafi caliphate in the broader Middle East, and their main regional enemies are the governments of Iran and Syria as well as Hezbollah and Kurdish fighters. Russia intervened in the Syrian civil war to help the Syrian government contain all anti-government factions, including ISIS. Russia has been at war with Islam since before 9/11 even happened. Read up on modern Russian history. Russia fights against radical Islam in Syria and also in Dagestan and Ingushetia. ISIS is everyone's enemy. ISIS-K is big in Afghanistan and neighboring places. And Afghans have a big beef to pick with Russia. The fact that they have other enemies too does not remove this. ISIS is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Everyone is Syria hates ISIS. The Russians fight them, Assad fights them, the Kurds fight them, the Turks fight them, the Americans fight them, the Syrian rebels fight them. Loads of people have interests in Syria, and ISIS is an obstacle for literally everyone. I'm sure ISIS doesn't actually care about Gaza, unfortunately. They view pretty much everyone other than themselves to be infidels that should be beheaded, lol. Even other Muslims. Even if Kim Kardashian gets pregnant, ISIS would take credit for that. ISIS has beef with almost the entire world. They got beef with Switzerland, for God's sake. They are nuts. Have no idea how they've survived this long with hundreds of enemies, both in their region and out. Putin can't afford a Muslim rebellion in Russia. If Chechnya turned on him now, followed by other Muslim minorities, he would be toast. ISIS targets multiple countries, including Russia, primarily due to opposing foreign policies and military actions in the Middle East. Their motivations are rooted in a radical ideology that seeks to challenge any state or power they perceive as contrary to their goals, not just the US. Putin has routinely oppressed Muslims in Russia, such as Chechnya and Dagestan. Russia fights ISIS-aligned groups in Syria and the Sahel. See, ISIS is nut job death cult that just wants to kill. 1. Russian bombing in Syria. 2. Russian bombing of Chechnya and Dagestan Muslim republics. 3. Way back, USSR's war in Afghanistan. No developed nation likes radical Islamic terrorism. They're the enemy of everybody. ISIS gains power through terrorist attacks. They want to revert the world to the strictest form of Islam and hope for Armageddon and the return of Allah and punishment of the infidels. Because they could. My personal theory is that all intelligence and security forces in Russia are fully mobilized in the war in Ukraine, and they didn't keep the usual suspects on watch. Having one maniac for a mystical crisis using a kitchen knife to stab people or renting a truck to plow into a crowd, that's one thing. Having a fully equipped commando for getting to Moscow to commit a slaughter, that's another. Major fuck-up by the services. Everyone who isn't ISIS is their enemy. Bullet point number 1 in ISIS founding documents is kill all apostates. Pretty much blanket covers it. ISIS has been a problem for Russia since Bashar al-Assad. It could be longer, but this is from what I know. ISIS has been trying to control regions of Syria, and Bashar al-Assad is backed by Putin, who has military installations in the country. I'm sure there is more to this that I am not totally aware of. Israel told them to as punishment for the veto yesterday. This wasn't the first attack. A Russian plane was blown up over Egypt's Sinai Desert in 2015 with 224 people on board, most of them Russian citizens. Islamic State claimed the attack and later published a photograph of the explosive device. They're just in line of a lot of people that want to attack Russia. Russia doesn't exactly stoke the best relationships. Everyone hates Russia, and for good reason. To steal their vodka? Who doesn't ISIS want to attack? Maybe ISIS found out that Russia declared the LGBT community a terrorist group and is now feeling ignored and upset. Russia was in Afghanistan long before the West. Check out the historical documentary Rambo 3 Foot. The real question should be, why had ISIS never attacked Israel? Do people not know history anymore? The Middle East and Russia have a past. The Soviets fucked that entire region up something fierce back in the day. There are still areas that never grew back from when the Russians firebombed miles of land. With enough time and resources, ISIS would attack all non-Muslim countries. ISIS is an enemy to a lot of countries. America isn't even their most recent attack. Russia has been bombing the crap out of Syria for the last decade. That's the answer. ISIS is the enemy of everyone. You know that Russia fought ISIS extensively in Syria. Russia has been conducting operations against ISIS in Syria and attacking Muslims in other African countries through proxy soldiers aka Wagner, etc. Russia is the primary force supporting the Assad regime in Syria. Syria is the second S in ISIS. Previously the second S stood for Al-Sham, which is eastern Syria, western Iraq. The Islamic State has many other reasons as well, including Russia's Eastern Orthodoxy and Russia's occupation of Chechnya. There were so many Chechens drawn to the IS that the US forces referred to occupied Tikrit as Little Chechnya. I would expect to learn that these ISIS fighters were Chechens who pledged allegiance to ISIS. Russia has had a long history of suppressing anything Islamic. Already in the 19th century they conquered, destroyed and murdered Islamic regions of Central Asia. Oh, I thought this was an opening line to a joke. Cato, get to the other side? Wagner fighting ISIS on Africa. Now that they are officially Russian African Corps, ISIS hates Russia. ISIS has the smoke with everyone, lol. The Russians sent the renamed Wagner Group into Africa to support an anti-French post-colonialism coup d'état that was having trouble with a big ISIS terrorist cell in the region. Might be retaliation from that intervention. Africa is a wild place. M8 foot. ISIS takes claim for everything bad that happens. Doesn't mean they are the ones who actually made it happen. ISIS wants a global caliphate. If they could have their way, the entire world would be under a single Islamic regime with Sharia. Why would you think it's only America or the West who is their enemy? I believe ISIS is Israeli. Syria.